the situation in Wisconsin, this is absolutely A, fascinating, and B, predictable, right? I mean, back when Scott Walker was saying, yeah, let's give $1 billion to Foxconn, or hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks. And in the actual deal that so Foxconn, of course, is the Chinese company that makes parts for iPhones. And they wanted to open a factory in the United States so that they could say, oh yeah, some of our stuff is made in the USA. Because, Apple's getting pressure about making their stuff overseas. So, if they're one of their suppliers, could make it in the US. And so Foxconn comes to Scott Walker and says, give us a fortune, give us $1 billion or hundreds of millions of dollars, and we'll build a factory here and we'll employ 13,000 people, which is like $300,000 per job in state money that we're giving Foxconn to create jobs that'll pay, maybe $40,000 a year. But still, they're, quote, manufacturing jobs. These are, quote, good jobs. And now Foxconn is saying, the agreement actually doesn't say that we have to create 13,000 jobs. That was just the news release that Donald Trump and Scott Walker quoted. But the agreement says that you have to pay us you have to give us all these tax breaks and give us all this money for decades, even if we don't build a factory. So instead, we're just going to build a little R&D unit. And we're just going to hire some people, maybe as many as 1,000, maybe not. So the question, here we have another example, and this is, certainly not the first. This has been going on in a huge way since the 1980s. Reagan actually promoted this kind of stuff. He thought competition among the states is a good thing. And so companies started playing this blackmail game, basically. I mean, probably the most famous example recently is Boeing. And this was a couple of years ago where Boeing was going, well, we're here in Seattle, but, we've got a large footprint in Seattle. We'd like to reach out and have a large footprint in a few other states where we can have some power over a few other senators and members of Congress, and we can have some national diversity. So, when we're trying to get another big defense contract, we'll have more support, or whatever. I mean, whatever their reasons may have been. And so they said, who's going to give us the most money? And you had all these different cities go, oh, we'll give you 10 years of tax abatements. We'll give you 5 years. We'll give you 20 years. We'll give you $1 billion. We'll give you land for free. We'll give you, this is a scam. And it's a scam or a con that big corporations, whether they're Chinese or American, big corporations have been running on American communities in a big way since the 1980s. And I think we need to put a stop to it. Now, I have an idea that I borrowed from Bernie Sanders years ago on how to stop this, and that is that any state in which the state, county, or municipal governments, in which any government in that state has offered tax breaks to a corporation to open a location in that state, any state that does that loses their federal highway funds. Very straightforward stuff. Now, why would you do this? Because prior to Reaganism, prior to the 1980s, the way that states used to compete with each other for business, the way that municipalities and counties and even states would go to big companies and say, you really should build your factory here, was based on infrastructure. It was real simple. Massachusetts would say, we've got MIT, we've got Harvard, we've got the Metro, we've got a good public transportation system, we've got a great public education system. You can have good, well-paid, you can have well-trained, very, very smart people working for you, and all you have to do is relocate yourself to Massachusetts. And companies did. And in California, they, hey, we've got a free public university system. College is free in California. This is all prior to Reagan becoming governor. He blew that up in the mid-70s. But, prior to that, California would say, well, actually, even through the 80s, because even when they made the colleges in California, when Reagan was governor and then as president, even though college in California became, kind of starting to get kind of expensive, it was still cheaper than pretty much anywhere else in the country. I mean, they had this entire statewide university system. And so California would say to companies, relocate here in California. We've got an educated workforce. Portland, Oregon would say to companies, you know, we have one of the most planned metropolitan areas in the United States. Pretty much everywhere in Portland, you can walk within a mile, you can walk to all your basic necessities. You can walk to a store where you can buy toilet paper, or where you can buy groceries, or, you know, fill in the blanks. We've got a very livable city. There is more green in Portland relative to non-green space than in any other city in the United States and most cities in the world. And it caused a lot of companies to say, you know, hey, let's build in Portland. But then when Reagan came along and said, oh, no, it's, you know, and this was the beginning, by the way, of Walmart expanding out and abandoning Sam Walton's claim that it's 100% made in America. That used to be the Walmart slogan or sub-slogan. Abandoning that and then starting this predatory practice of moving into areas where there was no, you know, large stores. There was a lot of local, vital, local, active local business moving into these communities and eating alive the local businesses. And since the 80s, I mean, they started out doing that without any support, without any, you know, tax abatements and things like that. Now they've got this thing fine-tuned down to the point where local communities are even helping them, you know, prevent unions. But now when a Walmart opens, they get free land, they get tax cuts, they get tax abatements, they get, you know, local support. Every business that opens, it seems, as long as it's a giant corporation. If it's a small company, nah. I mean, maybe small companies, there was talk back 20, 30 years ago about, you know, getting small companies together. Let's all band together and ask for tax breaks. It never worked. The towns, the municipality, they know that you're stuck here. You got a small company. But it used to be that cities competed with each other based on their infrastructure, their livability, you know, the quality of life, the quality of workers, the quality of infrastructure. And what that did prior to the 1980s, when communities competed with each other based on infrastructure, was it provided an incentive for all these communities to get richer, to get wealthier, because their infrastructure is part of their wealth. A city that has a good mass transit system, a city that has good high-speed broadband, this is what Chattanooga's doing. You know, a city-owned Wi-Fi system that is literally the fastest in the country and the cheapest in the country, because just like with healthcare, you don't have a giant corporation like Comcast just sucking all the money off the top and not upgrading their equipment and stuff, because it's not as profitable. So that's, you know, my idea of a way to do this. I'm curious what you think. Meanwhile, or you know, if you have any other suggestions. Meanwhile, I would add that I think that it's very much time for us to say, you know, we've got to restore incentives in the United States, not just to build, not just to manufacture things in this country, but to hire Americans to do that. You know, Foxconn's whole business model is cheap labor. And we've known that all along. It's a Chinese company. What made anybody think that they were going to actually hire people at a high wage in the United States? So how do you do this? This is the question that the people who started this country faced. George Washington, when he was, you know, when Charles Thompson, who was the Secretary of the Continental Congress, you know, rode up to Washington's house on April 14th, 1789 and said, okay, sir, you're president. And Washington was like, okay, two things we need to do. Number one, I need to go say goodbye to my mother because I'm never going to see her alive again, which was true. She was in her 80s and dying. And then he said, and I also want to be inaugurated in a suit of clothing made in the United States, which up until then had been illegal, up until the end of the Revolution, because we were operating under British colonial law. And the British said, no, you may not manufacture clothing in the United States. You have to buy it from England. You have to support our workers. But on April 28, 1873, a guy named Daniel Hinsdale started a little Made in America clothing store in Hartford, Connecticut. And George Washington knew about it. And he said, go to Hinsdale, get me a suit made in America. So Charles Thompson took his measurements and continued his horseback ride to Connecticut. And when he came back to New York, which is where Washington was sworn in, George Washington took his oath of office wearing a brown suit. Hinsdale didn't have any American-made black clothing, wearing a brown suit that was made in America. So then Washington turned to Hamilton and said, now how do we do this? How can we build manufacturing in this country? And Hamilton said, tariffs. It's very straightforward. He came out with this 11-point plan to rebuild America, or to build America. Item number 1, protecting duties, or duties on those foreign articles which are the rivals of domestic ones. Number 2, prohibition of rival articles or duties equivalent to prohibitions. Again, tariffs. Number 3, prohibitions on the exportation of material manufacturers. In other words, stop sending our raw materials overseas, stop shipping cotton to England, and start using it here. Put an export tariff on it. Number 4, pecuniary bounties. There are certain things that we definitely want to manufacture here. For example, cannons, or roads, or whatever. So you put you don't export roads. So we're going to actually give people an incentive to manufacture these things. Premiums. Same thing. The exemption of raw material of manufacture from duty. If you want to import raw materials to make manufactured goods, no tariffs. Drawbacks on the duties which are imposed when materials, these are all variations on the same thing. And this is what built America. Tariffs paid for 100% of our government, from the George Washington administration to the Civil War. It paid for 2/3 of our government from the Civil War to World War II. Now it pays for virtually nothing. So another question, with Donald Trump promoting tariffs, how do the Democrats reclaim their historic support for protectionist trade policies, which I'm an advocate of? How do we do it?